A millionaire businessman discovered he had a 7-year-old son he never knew. When their eyes met at the hospital, he immediately recognized his own face. Secrets came to light, and their lives changed forever in ways no one could have predicted. A story of transformation, forgiveness, and true love. Prepare yourself, because this story will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like on this video, and comment where you're watching from. St. Raphael Hospital gleamed with that antiseptic cleanliness characteristic of elite medical centers. The polished hallways reflected the ceiling lights as Alexander Blake strode forward with the determination that had made him one of the country's most powerful businessmen. His custom Italian suit contrasted with the white coats of the medical staff, who instinctively moved aside as he passed, as if recognizing the wake of power he left behind. He had come for a simple executive checkup, those that his personal physician insisted on performing semi-annually. A waste of time, in his opinion, but a necessary evil to keep the machinery that sustained his real estate empire functioning. Time was money, and he was mentally calculating the pending calls he could make in the waiting room. That's when it happened. As he turned down the hallway leading to the cardiology unit, his eyes encountered an image that made his heart, the very one he'd come to check, stop for an instant. Less than 10 meters away, seated on one of the padded benches, Victoria Miller cradled a small boy who dozed against her chest. Time seemed to freeze around Alexander. 8 years had passed since he last saw her, but he would recognize her anywhere. Her casually gathered brown hair, her delicate hands cradling the child, that profile he had once contemplated for hours. The child stirred slightly and turned his sleeping face. It was like looking into a mirror that went back 30 years in time. The same cheekbones, the same line of the jaw, even that small mole next to the left eyebrow. An exact replica of his own childhood photographs. A doctor approached Victoria, who stood carefully so as not to wake the little one. As she did so, her gaze met Alexander's. Recognition, surprise, and something else. Was it fear? Crossed her face before she looked away and followed the doctor down another hallway, pressing the child against her chest as if to protect him. Alexander remained motionless, feeling the foundations of his carefully controlled existence begin to crumble. Her thought emerged with the force of a revelation. Sometimes the empires we build so carefully are just empty fortresses that isolate us from what really matters. The limousine moved silently through the city streets as Alexander contemplated the urban landscape without really seeing it. Some of those skyscrapers bore his signature, projects that had transformed the skyline and multiplied his fortune. Normally, observing them provided an almost tangible satisfaction. Today, however, his mind was miles away, trapped in that hospital corridor. "Are you all right, sir?" The voice of James, his personal assistant for the past 5 years, interrupted his thoughts. "You seem troubled." Alexander barely looked at him. James was the embodiment of efficiency. Impeccable suit, tablet always at hand, capable of anticipating his needs even before he recognized them himself. That's precisely why he had hired him. "I need you to investigate something with absolute discretion," said Alexander, his controlled voice revealing just a hint of the internal storm. "Victoria Miller. I want to know everything about her for the past 8 years, where she lives, what she does, and if she has a son approximately 7 years old." James nodded, showing no surprise. Neutrality was one of his best professional qualities. "You'll have it this afternoon, sir." The Blake building stood as a monument to ambition made of glass and steel. From the penthouse that occupied the top 2 floors, Alexander could contemplate the city as a god would look upon his creation. Today, however, the panoramic views failed to appease his unrest. His office, designed by one of the world's most renowned interior designers, was a perfect combination of minimalist elegance and cutting-edge technology. The white walls displayed only 2 elements, an original Picasso and a black and white photograph of his parents, taken in the 80s in front of the small hardware store with which they started the family business. The contrast between that modest shop and his current empire was overwhelming. His parents had died in a plane accident when he was barely 20, leaving him a medium-sized business that he had transformed into a multinational conglomerate. "The price of success is absolute dedication," his father used to say. Alexander had paid that price many times over, sacrificing personal relationships on the altar of ambition. At 42, He was the country's most eligible bachelor. His relationship with Sophia Worthington, heiress to an aristocratic family and current director of a prestigious art gallery, occasionally occupied the society pages. A convenient alliance, almost businesslike in nature, that would culminate in a formal engagement during the charity gala his foundation would organize next month. The intercom interrupted his reflections. "Mr. Blake, Miss Worthington is here." Sophia entered as if the office belonged to her, with that confidence that only generations of privilege bestow. Tall, elegant, with her perfectly styled blonde hair and a dress that probably cost what some of his employees earned in a month. "Alexander, darling, what do you think of this place for the reception?" Without waiting for a response, she spread photographs of an exclusive coastal estate across his desk. "It has spectacular views, and we could limit the list to 200 guests to maintain exclusivity." He barely glanced at the images. "Whatever you decide will be fine," he responded with an automatism she seemed not to notice. "We also need to talk about the ring. I was thinking of something unique, perhaps specially designed by Cartier." Sophia continued detailing plans that now seemed to belong to a parallel life, an alternative reality that was blurring by the moment. The phone vibrated discreetly. A message from James. "Confidential information available in your secure email." "Sophia," he interrupted, "I have an important meeting. We'll talk during dinner." When he was finally alone, he opened the email with fingers that rarely showed hesitation. The information was concise but impactful. Victoria Miller, 38 years old, artisan specializing in traditional artistic jewelry, owner of a small workshop in the Old Town district, single mother of Matthew Miller, 7 years old, no father registered on the birth certificate, current address attached. Alexander felt short of breath. The dates matched perfectly. 8 years ago, his relationship with Victoria had ended abruptly, when he chose an international expansion opportunity over the future together that she longed for. "You will always choose business over people," were her last words. Words that now resonated with a new and terrible significance. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Catherine," he said when his former secretary answered, "I need to know something with absolute honesty. Did Victoria Miller try to contact me after our breakup?" The silence on the other end of the line was answer enough. The Old Town district represented everything that Alexander's real estate projects usually replaced. Narrow cobblestone streets, 2- or 3-story buildings with colorful facades, small family businesses that defied commercial homogenization, a place where time seemed to flow at a different speed. He parked his Aston Martin in front of a red brick building with a modest sign, "Victoria's Creations, Artisanal Jewelry." Through the storefront, he could distinguish delicate pieces that combined ancestral techniques with contemporary designs. The contrast with the luxury jewelry stores he frequented couldn't be greater. The door's bell announced his entrance. The interior smelled of wood, metal, and something indefinable, perhaps the very essence of creativity. Victoria was bent over a workbench, focusing on a piece under directional light. She looked up and, recognizing him, her hands stopped mid-movement. The silence that settled between them seemed to contain 8 years of unspoken words. "I saw you at the hospital," Alexander finally said, his voice more vulnerable than he intended. "I saw the boy." Victoria carefully set down her tools and straightened up. The years had been good to her. Her beauty had transformed into something deeper, more authentic. "I knew this day would eventually come," she replied with a calmness that seemed rehearsed. "Though I was hoping to have more time to prepare Matthew." "Is he my son?" The direct question, almost brutal in its simplicity. Victoria's eyes, those amber eyes that had once looked at him with love, now showed a mixture of resignation and determination. "Yes, Alexander. Matthew is your son." The impact of the confirmation, though expected, hit him with physical force. He leaned on the counter, feeling the world spinning around him. "Why did you never tell me?" he finally managed to articulate. "I had the right to know." Victoria's expression hardened. "I tried. For weeks after discovering I was pregnant, I tried to contact you. Your secretaries, your assistants, all had the same response. You were too busy with the expansion in Asia. Finally, your head of security warned me to stop trying, that you only saw me as an opportunist after your fortune." Each word was a stab. Alexander vaguely remembered comments from Catherine about the ex who wouldn't stop calling, but at that time he was completely absorbed in crucial negotiations. He had given instructions not to be bothered by unimportant personal matters. "Victoria, I had no idea. If I had known—" "What would you have done?" she interrupted. "Send a check, offer a legal agreement and a generous pension? Or would you have tried to integrate a baby into your life of board meetings and intercontinental travels?" The question hung between them, uncomfortable in its precision. Deep down, they both knew the answer. "I want to meet him," Alexander finally said, with the determination he usually used to close impossible negotiations. "I want to be part of his life." Victoria looked at him for a long time, as if evaluating not only his words but something deeper. "It's not that simple, Alexander. Matthew is 7 years old. He's grown up without a father, surrounded by people who love and protect him. You can't just appear and claim your place because it's now convenient for you. He's my son. He's a child, not property," she responded firmly. Her sensitive, intelligent child, who's been asking questions about his father since he was 4 years old. A child to whom I've had to explain that sometimes people who love each other take different paths, without mentioning that his father preferred his business empire to even knowing him. The blow hit the mark. Alexander had never felt so clearly the weight of his past choices. At that moment, the back door of the workshop opened, and a small whirlwind came running in. "Mom, look what I drew in class." Matthew stopped short upon seeing the stranger. "Oh, hello." Alexander was paralyzed. It was like looking at a miniature version of himself, but with Victoria's warm eyes and a smile that lit up the entire room. The boy wore worn jeans and a dinosaur t-shirt, his school backpack almost as big as him. "Matthew, this is a friend of Mom's," Victoria said in a controlled voice. "Mr. Blake." "Like the poet?" asked the child, referring to William Blake. "We're learning about famous writers in school." "Exactly like the poet," Alexander responded, surprised by the lump in his throat. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Matthew." The boy smiled, oblivious to the emotional turmoil his presence had unleashed, and extended his drawing to his mother, a colorful representation of what appeared to be a workshop similar to Victoria's, but populated by fantastic figures working on magical jewels. "It's beautiful, honey," said Victoria. "Why don't you go finish your homework while I talk a moment more with Mr. Blake?" When Matthew disappeared through the back door, Victoria turned to Alexander. "I need time," she said, "and you need to think seriously about what this means. This isn't about signing a contract or closing a deal, it's about a lifelong commitment." Alexander nodded, unable to articulate the emotions that were crossing him. Before leaving, he left his personal card on the counter. "My private number," he said, "when you're ready to talk." As he left the workshop, the late afternoon light bathed the old town district with a golden glow that contrasted sharply with the modern skyscrapers outlined in the distance. Two worlds separated by much more than miles. The law office of Robertson and Associates occupied the 15th floor of one of the most prestigious buildings in the financial district. William Robertson, founding partner and Alexander's personal friend since university, received him with the familiarity that only decades of mutual trust bestow. "It must be important for you to cancel a video conference with the Dubai investors," William commented as he served 2 whiskeys. "The last time you did something like this was when your Uncle Richard passed away." Alexander took the glass, but didn't drink. "I need to conduct a paternity test with absolute discretion," he said without preamble, "and prepare documents for legal recognition, maintenance agreements, educational trusts, everything necessary." William set his own glass on the mahogany desk. "Do you want to tell me what's going on?" "I have a 7-year-old son." The revelation floated in the air-conditioned office. William, accustomed to maintaining composure during the most complicated negotiations, couldn't hide his amazement. "Are you sure? Because if it's some woman looking—" "It's Victoria," Alexander interrupted. "And yes, I'm practically certain. The boy is—" He searched for the right words. "It's like seeing myself at that age." William nodded slowly, processing the information. "The DNA test is the first step, of course. I can arrange it with a trusted laboratory. Regarding the legal documents—" He paused. "Alexander, have you considered the implications? This could affect your personal plans, the public perception of the company, the engagement with Sophia." "I don't care," he responded with unusual firmness. He's my son. On the way back to his penthouse, Alexander asked his driver to take a detour through the Central Park. He needed to think, and the glass walls of his empire were beginning to feel claustrophobic. The park was bustling with activity on that spring afternoon. Families enjoying late picnics, children chasing balls, couples walking hand in hand. Everyday scenes he had always observed with distant curiosity, as if they belonged to a reality parallel to his own. His phone rang. It was James. "Sir, I have additional information about Victoria Miller that I think you should know." His voice sounded unusually tense. "It's about the contact attempts 8 years ago." "I'm listening." "I've reviewed the old records. Ms. Miller called your office 27 times over a 2-month period. She also sent 11 emails that were marked as spam by our filters." An uncomfortable pause. "Sir, I was the one who gave the order to the security team to warn her to stop trying to contact you." Alexander closed his eyes, feeling anger growing inside him. "By what authority? You had just closed the deal with the Chinese investors. You were working 20 hours a day. You gave me explicit instructions to filter out any distractions." James's voice broke slightly. "I investigated her, sir. Your relationship had ended months earlier. I assumed she was only looking to benefit from your new position. I acted thinking I was protecting your interests." "My interests," Alexander repeated, the bitter irony in his voice. "Your decisions cost me 7 years of my son's life. Sir, I deeply regret it. I had no idea. Present your resignation first thing tomorrow." Alexander hung up, aware of the injustice of venting his frustration on James. After all, his assistant had only followed the example he himself had set, always prioritizing business over people. Night found him in his penthouse, contemplating the city lights. The 6,000-square-foot apartment, decorated by one of the world's most sought-after designers, had never seemed so empty to him. The white walls, the minimalist Italian design furniture, the carefully selected works of art by advisors, everything now seemed like an elaborate stage set for a life that wasn't quite real. On the coffee table rested a folder with preliminary information about the legal procedures William had prepared. There was also a small box with the DNA test kit. Simple, discreet, scientifically infallible, and yet Alexander felt that the most important truth he had already seen in Matthew's eyes. His phone vibrated with a message from Victoria. "Tomorrow, West Park by the lake. 4 p.m. Come alone." West Park was the city's green lung, a haven where entire families spent weekends. Alexander, accustomed to meetings in boardrooms and exclusive restaurants, felt strangely out of place among the balloon vendors and artisanal ice cream stands. He had opted for casual attire, jeans and a shirt, probably the most expensive in the park, but a conscious attempt to adapt his appearance to the surroundings. He spotted Victoria and Matthew by the lake, feeding the ducks. The boy laughed every time the birds swooped down on the bread, his crystalline laughter transporting Alexander to an unknown place and time. "Hello?" he greeted, approaching with caution uncharacteristic of him. "Hey, it's the Starman!" exclaimed Matthew, remembering his last name associated with Blake the poet. "Look how many ducks came today." Victoria gave him a look that mixed warning and resignation. "Matthew, why don't you go buy more bread for the ducks?" She handed him some coins. "Don't stray too far from the stand, okay?" When the boy walked away, Victoria spoke in a low voice. "I've decided you can get to know him gradually, as a family friend for now." Her tone allowed no argument. "Depending on how everything evolves, we'll consider telling him the truth later." Alexander nodded, grateful for the opportunity, but aware of the fragility of the agreement. "About the paternity test," he began. "It's not necessary," Victoria interrupted. "We both know the truth, but if you need it for your lawyers or your conscience, I won't object." Matthew came running back, his energy seemingly inexhaustible. "Look, the ice cream man brought new flavors." He pointed enthusiastically toward a cart painted in vibrant colors. The three walked toward the stand, a strange family unit that attracted curious glances. To any casual observer, they might have seemed like a conventional family enjoying a Sunday afternoon. Reality was infinitely more complex. "What flavor ice cream would you like, Matthew?" asked Alexander, attempting the first paternal gesture of his life. "Mint chocolate chip," the boy responded without hesitation. "It's been my favorite forever." A shiver ran down Alexander's back. Mint chocolate chip, his own favorite flavor since childhood. a trivial detail that suddenly acquired an almost mystical significance, an invisible genetic thread connecting them across the years of separation. While Matthew enjoyed his ice cream, getting his face messy in the process, Victoria discreetly explained to Alexander some basic aspects of the boy's life: his school, his hobbies, drawing and astronomy mainly, his neighborhood friends, fragments of an existence that had developed completely outside of his own. "He's very intelligent," Victoria commented, with the pride characteristic of every mother. "His teacher says he has special aptitudes for science and art. Though he's also quite stubborn when something gets into his head. Like his mother," Alexander observed, and for a brief instant, a spark of the old complicity shone between them. "Like both of us, I'd say." The afternoon passed with a naturalness that surprised everyone. Matthew, with the adaptability characteristic of children, accepted without question the presence of this new adult in his universe. By the time the sun began to set, Alexander had learned more about dinosaurs, constellations, and superheroes than he ever would have imagined. When saying goodbye, Matthew handed him a hastily made drawing: 3 stylized figures next to a lake, with ducks that looked more like pterodactyls than aquatic birds. "It's so you don't forget today," the boy explained, with that raw honesty of childhood. "Next time, we could go to the planetarium. They have a new exhibition about black holes." "I'd love that," Alexander responded, surprised by the emotion that gripped his throat. Alone, Victoria looked at him with an evaluating expression. "You did well," she conceded, "but this is just the beginning. Being a father isn't about fun afternoons in the park. It's about being present when he's sick at 3 in the morning. It's about setting limits even though he momentarily hates you for it. It's about always putting his needs before yours." "I want to learn," Alexander affirmed, with a humility unusual for him. "Give me a real chance, Victoria." She sighed, as if the weight of the decision burdened her. "You can see him on Sunday afternoons to start. And Alexander," she added as he was already leaving, "don't buy his affection. He doesn't need expensive toys or the latest technology. He needs your time and your authentic attention." Back at his penthouse, Alexander contemplated Matthew's drawing, a simple object that was worth more than any of the artworks adorning his walls. He carefully placed it on the refrigerator door, secured with a magnet as he had seen done in friends' homes who had children, a small gesture that subtly transformed his impersonal space into something closer to a home. The following days passed in a strange duality for Alexander. In the mornings, he directed his empire with his usual precision and coldness. In the afternoons, he devoured books on parenting and child development with the same intensity with which he had once studied market strategies. James, whom he had finally not fired after a sincere conversation, observed the change with cautious curiosity. "Sir, the Board of Directors requests confirmation of your attendance at the strategic retreat next weekend at Hidden Valley," he informed during a morning meeting. Alexander consulted his calendar. Sunday, his day with Matthew. "I won't attend," he responded without hesitation. "Schedule a video conference for the following Monday. They can present the results to me then." The confusion on James's face was evident. In 10 years, Alexander had never missed a strategic retreat. "Are you sure? The shareholders will wait," he interrupted firmly. "I have an unavoidable personal commitment." That same afternoon, Sophia appeared unannounced at his office, elegant as always in a designer outfit and discreet but obviously expensive jewelry. "Alexander, darling, we need to finalize the details of the engagement announcement. The gala is in 3 weeks and you still haven't approved the press release." He looked up from the documents he was reviewing, curiously a catalogue of telescopes for children. "Sophia, we need to talk." Something in his tone must have alerted her because she sat down slowly, studying him with attention. "You sound unusually serious. Problems with some project?" "I've discovered I have a son." The silence that followed was absolute. Sophia remained perfectly still, only a slight tick in her left eye betraying the impact of the revelation. "Excuse me?" Her voice was controlled but with a sharp edge. "A 7-year-old boy. His mother is Victoria Miller, with whom I had a relationship 8 years ago." Sophia stood up and walked to the window, turning her back to him as she absorbed the news. When she turned around, her face was a mask of composure. "And this revelation? Does it have any repercussions for our plans?" The question was loaded with meanings. She hadn't asked about the boy, about how Alexander felt, or about the details of the situation. Her immediate concern was for the plans, the engagement, the wedding, the merger of two fortunes and illustrious surnames. "I don't know," he responded honestly. "Everything is happening very quickly. I need time to assimilate it, to get to know Matthew, to understand my role in his life." Sophia nodded mechanically. "I understand. And how much time do you think you'll need to assimilate it?" Her tone made it clear that she considered the situation a temporary inconvenience, an obstacle to overcome before resuming the planned course. "It's not something that can be measured in days or weeks, Sophia. He's my son. He will be part of my life forever." She visibly tensed. "What does that mean exactly? Do you plan to bring him to live here, present him in society, turn our marriage into some kind of family arrangement with weekend visits?" The calculating coldness with which she posed these questions made Alexander see her in a completely new light. "I haven't thought that far ahead," he responded. "For now, I'm just getting to know him, building a relationship." Sophia picked up her purse with precise movements. "Take your time to build relationships, Alexander. Meanwhile, I must reconsider certain aspects of my social agenda." When the door closed behind her, Alexander felt a strange mixture of relief and concern. Sophia's reaction had been exactly what one would expect. Pragmatic, focused on appearances and social consequences, the same things he would have valued just a few weeks ago. The following Sunday dawned with perfect clarity. Alexander had carefully planned the day. A visit to the planetarium, as Matthew had suggested, followed by lunch at a family restaurant recommended by his building's doorman, a man with 3 children who had smiled sympathetically upon hearing his plans. He arrived at Victoria's modest apartment with British punctuality. The building, though well-maintained, contrasted dramatically with the spaces he usually frequented. 3 floors without an elevator, neighbors who greeted each other by name, clothes hanging on some balconies. A different world from his own, with its own codes and rhythms. Matthew opened the door, visibly excited. "You came! Mom said you would, but I wasn't sure," he exclaimed, almost jumping in place. "Look, I put on my planet t-shirt." Indeed, the boy was wearing a t-shirt with the solar system printed on it. Alexander surprised himself by immediately recognizing this small detail from Matthew's universe, treasuring it like a precious object. Victoria appeared behind her son, dressed simply but with that natural style he had always admired in her. "Good morning, Alexander. Matthew hasn't talked about anything else all week." The planetarium turned out to be a revealing experience. Seeing the universe through Matthew's amazed eyes transformed the visit into something magical. The boy knew surprisingly much about stars and constellations, and Alexander found himself learning from his own son. "Did you know that new stars are born in the Orion constellation?" Matthew explained with overflowing enthusiasm. "The teacher says it's like a nursery for stars." During lunch at a family pizzeria downtown, Alexander observed, fascinated, how Matthew interacted with his surroundings, greeting other children, conversing naturally with the waiters, genuinely enjoying simple experiences like a shared pizza. "It's incredible," he commented to Victoria, while the boy was distracted with a board game the restaurant provided. "He has a presence, a way of connecting with everything and everyone. He's grown up surrounded by community," she explained. "In our neighborhood, neighbors are like extended family. Mrs. Eleanor, my upstairs neighbor, has been like a grandmother to him. The bakery owner always saves the first sweetbread of the morning for him. He lives in a world where human connections are as natural as breathing." The observation contained an implicit criticism of the isolated world in which Alexander had chosen to live, but he received it without defensiveness, recognizing its truth. "I want him to see my apartment," he said suddenly, "next Sunday, if that's okay with you, so he can see that part of me too." Victoria visibly hesitated. "Alexander, your world is very different from his. I don't want him to feel dazzled by superficial luxuries or worse, intimidated." "I promise not to turn it into a display of ostentation," he responded, surprising himself with the sincerity of his intention. "I just want to share my space with him, as he has shared his with me." She finally nodded, though with evident reservation. "All right, but I'll be present. And at the first sign that Matthew feels uncomfortable, we're leaving." When saying goodbye that afternoon, Matthew spontaneously hugged him, a gesture that caught Alexander completely off guard. The small arms around his waist provoked such an intense emotion that for a moment he feared breaking down right there in the middle of the street. "Will you come next Sunday without fail?" asked the boy, his eyes seeking confirmation. "Without fail," promised Alexander, and for the first time in his adult life, no contract, no negotiation, no business agreement had seemed as solemn and unbreakable as this simple promise made to a child. Alexander spent the week preparing his penthouse for Matthew's visit, with the same care he would have devoted to the most important negotiation of his career. He asked his interior designer to transform one of the guest rooms into a welcoming space for a child, though without exaggerations that might confirm Victoria's fears. The result was a balance between elegance and warmth. A room with deep blue walls where constellations projected when the lights were turned off, a small library with carefully selected books on astronomy, science and adventures, and a professional quality telescope next to the window offering the best views of the city. "Is everything ready for his visit, sir?" asked James on Friday afternoon, while they reviewed the following week's agenda. "I think so," Alexander responded, surprising himself with a hint of nervousness. "Do you think I should have something more normal? Toys or video games, perhaps?" James smiled slightly, a rare gesture in his usual formality. "My nephews are approximately his age," he commented. "They enjoy technology as much as simple games. Perhaps something intermediate would be appropriate." Following the advice, Alexander added a modest construction set and some classic board games to the room. Nothing excessive, nothing that screamed, "I'm buying your affection." Just options, possibilities for shared moments. On Sunday, when the doorbell announced Victoria and Matthew's arrival, Alexander found himself nervously adjusting his casual cashmere sweater. He had dismissed the staff for the occasion, wanting the visit to be as personal as possible. Matthew's expression upon entering the exclusive building's lobby had already been one of absolute amazement. "It's like a modern castle," he exclaimed, turning around to absorb the marble mirrors and artwork in the lobby. "Do you really live here?" "Only on the top floor," Alexander responded, feeling a strange embarrassment for the opulence he had, until then, simply considered his standard of living. The private elevator took them directly to the penthouse, where the panoramic views of the city provoked another round of exclamations from Matthew. "I can see my school from here," he shouted, running from window to window. "And the park and the river." Victoria observed in silence, her expression inscrutable, as she contemplated the space that represented everything Alexander had chosen over them 8 years ago. The tour of the apartment culminated in the room prepared for Matthew. Upon entering, the boy was momentarily speechless, a phenomenon that Alexander had already learned was extremely rare. "Is this for me?" he finally asked, his voice small. "For when you come to visit," Alexander clarified, aware of Victoria's attentive gaze. "I thought you might like to have your own space here." Matthew approached the telescope with almost religious reverence. "Can we use it now?" "It's daytime, honey," Victoria intervened gently. "The stars aren't visible with sunlight." "But we can program it for tonight," suggested Alexander. If you can stay for dinner." The invitation hung in the air, loaded with multiple meanings. Victoria visibly hesitated. "Please, Mom," begged Matthew. "I want to see Jupiter through a real telescope." "We could order something simple," added Alexander. "Nothing formal." Finally, Victoria nodded. "All right, but not too late. There's school tomorrow." The afternoon passed with surprising naturalness. They played with the construction set, Alexander discovering muscles he hadn't used in decades as he sat on the floor next to Matthew. For dinner, against all odds, they ended up preparing homemade pizza in the designer kitchen he rarely used. "I've never cooked here before," Alexander confessed as Matthew spread cheese with excessive enthusiasm. "Never?" The boy seemed genuinely surprised. "Then how do you eat?" "Restaurants, mainly. Or the chef who comes a few times a week." "You have your own chef?" Matthew's eyes opened comically. "Like in cartoons?" Alexander laughed, suddenly aware of how absurd his life must sound to a child's ears. Night fell and, as promised, he configured the telescope to observe Jupiter and its moons. The three took turns, Alexander explaining what little he knew while Matthew complimented with surprisingly accurate data for his age. There was something intensely intimate about the three of them there, in the half-light, sharing the wonder of the celestial. For a fleeting moment, Alexander allowed himself to imagine how it would have been if things had been different, if he had been present from the beginning. "It's time to go," Victoria eventually announced, breaking the spell. "Matthew, gather your things, please." While the boy packed up the drawings he had made during the afternoon, Victoria approached Alexander. "You did a good job with the room," she conceded in a low voice. "I was afraid it would be excessive." "I'm trying to learn," he responded simply. When saying goodbye, Matthew hugged him again, this time with greater familiarity. "Next time we could make cookies," he suggested enthusiastically. "Grandma Eleanor taught me a special recipe with chocolate chips." "I'd love to learn," Alexander responded, surprising himself by finding he meant it completely seriously. When the door closed behind them, the silence of the penthouse enveloped him like never before. Spaces that had always seemed elegantly minimalist to him now felt simply empty. The architectural perfection he had valued so highly suddenly seemed cold and lifeless compared to the small apartment, full of color, noise, and ordered chaos where his son lived. He slowly toured the rooms, stopping at small details that had changed with the brief visit. A tomato sauce stain on the designer sofa, small finger marks on the glass, a building block forgotten under the dining table. Imperfections that, surprisingly, made the place feel for the first time like a real home. Sundays quickly became the axis around which Alexander's week revolved. Visits to the zoo, the science museum, board game afternoons, home experiments that invariably ended in controlled disasters and laughter. Each encounter revealed new facets of Matthew, and surprisingly of himself. Sophia had maintained a cautious distance, limiting herself to social encounters where her absence would have been noticeable. The charity gala had been postponed indefinitely, a silent acknowledgement that the engagement plans were, at the very least, on hold. It was during Matthew's 5th visit to the penthouse when it happened. They were in the kitchen, preparing cookies following Grandma Eleanor's famous recipe, when the boy asked the question that had been hanging in the air from the beginning. "Alexander, can I ask you something?" he said, while mixing the dough with excessive concentration. "Of course," he responded, trying to maintain a casual tone despite the sudden tension in his shoulders. "Are you my dad?" Time seemed to stop. Victoria, who was preparing coffee at the adjacent counter, became completely still. Alexander felt the air leave his lungs. Carefully, he crouched down to Matthew's height, whose eyes, his own eyes, he realized with renewed impact, looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and something deeper. "Why do you ask that?" he finally managed to articulate. Matthew shrugged with that disconcerting naturalness of children. "You have photos just like mine when you were little, and Oliver from my class says that sometimes dads don't live with mums, but they're still dads. And Grandma Eleanor always says I have your same gestures when I concentrate." He paused to consider his own words. "And besides, you look a lot like me." Alexander looked at Victoria, seeking guidance. She approached and knelt beside them, taking Matthew's small hand in hers. "Matthew, honey," so she began, but the boy interrupted her. "It's okay if he is, Mom. I had already thought about it. I'm not angry." The simplicity of his acceptance, the unexpected maturity in his words, hit Alexander harder than any accusation or reproach could have. "Yes, Matthew," he finally responded, his voice barely audible. "I am your dad." The boy nodded, as if confirming something he already knew, and then asked with childlike pragmatism, "So can I call you Dad instead of Alexander? Alexander is very long." A nervous laugh escaped Victoria's lips, breaking the tension of the moment. Alexander felt something inside him simultaneously crumbling and rebuilding. "I would love for you to call me Dad," he responded, surprised by the emotion that filled his voice. "If your mum agrees." Victoria nodded slightly, her eyes bright with contained tears. "And why didn't you live with us before?" Matthew continued, returning to mixing the cookies as if they were discussing the weather. Alexander breathed deeply, aware that his answer would forever mark their relationship. The temptation to offer a sugar-coated version was strong, but something in his son's direct gaze prevented any form of dishonesty. "Because I made a mistake," he finally said. "I didn't know how to see what was really important. I was so focused on building buildings and businesses that I didn't realize the most valuable thing was the family we could have formed. Like when I build a tower too high but forget to make the base well and everything falls down?" asked Matthew, looking for a comprehensible analogy. Exactly like that, Alexander confirmed, amazed by the precision of the comparison. Matthew seemed satisfied with the explanation. Well, but now you're here, he declared with the simplicity characteristic of his age, and we can make the base stronger. Grandma Eleanor says it's never too late to fix what's broken. Your Grandma Eleanor seems very wise, Alexander commented, giving Victoria a meaningful look. She is, Victoria confirmed with a small smile. And she also says cookies don't bake themselves, so perhaps we should finish the dough. The moment of tension had passed, dissolved by the extraordinary adaptability of children. As they formed the cookies on the tray, Matthew chatted about his school friends whose parents lived separately, normalizing the situation with a naturalness that left Alexander amazed. That night, after Victoria and Matthew left, with promises of a next Sunday at the zoo, Alexander remained for a long time contemplating the city from his terrace. The lights of the buildings, many of them built by his company, twinkled like earthly stars. His phone rang. It was Victoria. "I wanted to make sure you're okay," she said without preamble. "Today's conversation was intense." "I'm processing it all," he admitted. "Matthew is extraordinary. So direct, so capable of accepting things as they are. Children are usually like that when they feel secure," Victoria responded. "And he feels secure with you. You've built that trust these weeks." The compliment, coming from her, meant more than any professional recognition he had ever received. "Victoria," he began, unsure of how to continue, "I want to do things right. Not just for Matthew, but for all of us." The silence on the other end of the line extended for several seconds. "1 week at a time, Alexander," she finally responded. "We'll see where this path leads us." The call ended, leaving him with a strange mixture of hope and anxiety. The path Victoria mentioned was completely unknown to him. There were no strategic plans, feasibility studies, or result projections that could guide him. For the first time in his adult life, he was advancing without a defined map, guided only by that new inner compass that seemed to constantly point toward his son, and perhaps also toward the woman who had kept alive the possibility of this second chance. The news broke on a Tuesday morning without warning. Alexander was in the middle of a meeting with foreign investors when James burst into the room with an expression of alarm he had never seen before. "Sir, I need to speak with you urgently," he said, extending a tablet with the digital front page of Business Chronicle, the country's most widely read business publication. The headline was devastating. "The secret heir to the Blake Empire, the negligent billionaire and the son he denied for 7 years." Below the headline, a photograph of Alexander and Matthew at the zoo the previous Sunday, their faces partially blurred but clearly recognizable. Alexander felt the blood drain from his face. "Gentlemen, we'll have to postpone this meeting," he announced with a calmness he was far from feeling. "My assistant will reschedule promptly." In the privacy of his office, he read the full article. It was a calculatedly malicious piece, full of half-truths and harmful speculations. According to the publication, Alexander had been informed of Victoria's pregnancy and had chosen to buy her silence, deliberately staying away from his paternal responsibility until recent strategic interests had led him to suddenly reclaim his paternity. "Who leaked this?" he asked James, who remained standing by the desk. "We're investigating, sir, but the style and contacts point to Nicholas Rivers." Alexander momentarily closed his eyes. Nicholas Rivers, his former partner turned rival after a bitter commercial dispute 3 years ago, a man known for his ruthless tactics and his extraordinary network of informants. His phone rang. It was Victoria. "Have you seen the news?" Her voice sounded tense, worried. "There are journalists in front of Matthew's school, and others waiting at the door of our building." "I'm on my way," he responded immediately. "Where is Matthew now?" "Still at school. The principal has kept him inside, away from the windows." "Alexander, he's scared. He doesn't understand what's happening. Tell the principal not to release Matthew to anyone except you or me. I'll send my security team to escort you. Victoria, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to expose you like this." "I know," she responded, her voice softening slightly. "But we need to solve this quickly, for Matthew." Alexander spent the next hours managing the crisis on multiple fronts. His legal team prepared statements, his security department organized protection protocols, and his public relations tried to contain the media damage. all while he himself headed to Matthew's school, determined to personally protect his son from the storm he had unleashed. Rainbow Elementary was a cheerful two-story building with colorful murals and a small tree-lined courtyard. Today, however, the atmosphere was tainted by the presence of news vans and photographers on the opposite sidewalk. Alexander entered through a side door where Victoria was already waiting for him, along with the principal, a middle-aged woman with a concerned but firm expression. "Mr. Blake," the principal greeted, "this situation is completely unacceptable. Our students should not be exposed to this kind of media circus." "I completely agree, Principal Reynolds," Alexander responded. "My lawyers are managing court orders to keep the press away from the school and my son's residence. Meanwhile, I've brought professional security to ensure their protection." Matthew appeared at that moment, escorted by a teacher. His usually cheerful face showed confusion and some apprehension. "Why are there so many people with cameras, Mum?" he asked, approaching Victoria. "The teacher wouldn't let me look out the window." Victoria knelt in front of him, gently stroking his hair. "Some people are very interested in knowing more about us, honey, especially since Dad has been in our lives." It was the first time Victoria had referred to Alexander as Dad, and the impact of that simple word almost distracted him from the gravity of the situation. "Is it because you're famous?" asked Matthew, addressing Alexander. "Oliver says his dad says you're like really important and appear in business magazines." "Something like that," Alexander responded, also crouching down to his height. "But the important thing now is to get you home safely. Do you trust me?" Matthew nodded solemnly. The plan was simple but effective. While a corporate car with tinted windows waited at the main entrance, attracting the attention of journalists, a modest sedan driven by one of the security guards would pick them up at the back of the building, taking them to a secure location until the situation calmed down. "I've prepared a house in the suburbs," Alexander explained to Victoria as they headed to the back exit. "It's discreet, secure, and comfortable. You could stay there until this calms down." "A contingency house?" she asked with slight incredulity. "Do you always have properties ready for emergencies?" "Actually, it's where my parents lived," he responded quietly. "I've maintained it, though I rarely visit." The revelation seemed to surprise Victoria, who looked at him with renewed interest. The journey passed in tense silence, Matthew exceptionally quiet as he looked out the window. Finally, after almost an hour's drive, they arrived at a residential area in the suburbs, with large gardens and houses spaced apart. Nothing ostentatious, simply comfortable. Alexander's parents' house was a two-story construction with a gabled roof and a wide porch. A weeping willow dominated the front garden, its branches swaying gently in the breeze. "There's a swing!" exclaimed Matthew upon getting out of the car, his childish enthusiasm quickly recovering at the sight of an old wooden swing hanging from a low branch. "It was mine when I was a child," Alexander explained, surprised it was still there. "My father built it the summer I turned 6. They entered the house where the housekeeper, an older woman who had worked for the family for decades, welcomed them with genuine warmth. "Young Master Alexander," she greeted with a familiarity that Victoria had never heard directed at him. "Everything is prepared as requested." "Thank you, Margaret," he responded with equal warmth. "This is Victoria and Matthew. They'll be staying a few days." The woman observed Matthew with evident emotion. "He's identical to you at his age," she commented, and then added in a conspiratorial tone, "There are freshly baked cookies in the kitchen in case anyone is hungry after the trip." Matthew needed no further invitation and followed Margaret to the kitchen, leaving Alexander and Victoria alone in the foyer. "So this is the house where you grew up," Victoria commented, observing the family photographs that adorned the walls. Alexander as a child with his parents, graduations, family moments frozen in time. "Until I was 18, he confirmed. "Then I went to university and only returned for holidays. When my parents passed away, I didn't have the heart to sell it. Margaret has continued caring for it all these years." Victoria stopped in front of a particular photograph. Alexander at approximately Matthew's age, concentrating on building some kind of structure with building blocks. "It's amazing," she murmured. "The same furrowed brow when he concentrates, the same way of biting his lip." "You told me your mother mentioned that," Alexander recalled. "Grandma Eleanor has a good eye for details," she responded with a small smile. She was the first to suspect I was pregnant, even before I knew myself. The mention of Eleanor reminded Alexander of another pending complication. We should call your mother, inform her of the situation. We can send someone to bring her here if she wants to be with you and Matthew. Victoria nodded, grateful for the consideration. In the kitchen, they found Matthew already completely adapted, sitting at the table with a glass of milk and cookies, attentively listening to Margaret's stories about young Master Alexander, when he was his age. "Dad!" he exclaimed upon seeing him enter. "Margaret says you also broke a window playing ball when you were 7 years old, just like me last month." The naturalness with which he now used Dad, as if it had always been part of his vocabulary, caused a lump in Alexander's throat. That night, after Matthew finally fell asleep in what had been Alexander's childhood room, marveling at finding some vintage toys still stored in the closet, the adults gathered in the living room to assess the situation. "My lawyers have identified the source of the leak," Alexander reported, seated across from Victoria with a cup of tea between his hands. "As we suspected, it was Nicholas Rivers. Apparently, he's been watching me since we began our Sunday visits." "Why would he do something like this?" asked Eleanor, Victoria's mother, who had insisted on joining them despite the circumstances. "What does he gain by exposing a child this way?" "Revenge, mainly," Alexander responded bitterly. 3 years ago, his company attempted a hostile takeover of Blake Construction. I stopped him and, in the process, exposed some of his questionable business practices. He lost important contracts, and his reputation was tarnished. He's been looking for a way to return the blow ever since. "And now he uses Matthew as a weapon," Victoria concluded, the indignation evident in her voice. "What kind of person does that?" "The type of person who sees human relationships as transactions and people as assets or liabilities," Alexander responded, aware of the irony that such a description could have applied to himself until very recently. "What's the plan now?" asked Eleanor, always practical. "We can't keep Matthew hidden indefinitely. He has school friends, a life. My lawyers are filing a defamation lawsuit against the publication and against Rivers personally," Alexander explained. "We're also requesting precautionary measures to protect Matthew's privacy as a minor, but the most effective thing will be to control the narrative." "What do you mean?" Victoria asked with suspicion. "To tell our own story, on our terms," he responded. "An exclusive interview with a respectable medium where we can establish the truth, that I didn't know about the pregnancy, that upon discovering Matthew's existence I've assumed my responsibility, that we're building a positive family relationship." Victoria considered the proposal in silence. "I don't want Matthew to participate in any interview," she finally said. "No photographs, no questions. He's a child, not a public relations element." "Completely agreed." Alexander nodded without hesitation. "The interview would be just with us, and would only address the basic facts necessary to refute the falsehoods in the article. No intimate details, nothing that could affect Matthew in the future." Eleanor, who had been observing the exchange with interest, intervened. "You seem different, Alexander. Victoria told me about the man you were 8 years ago. Ambitious, focused exclusively on your business, unable to prioritize personal relationships." Her tone was not accusatory but evaluative. "But the man sitting in front of me now seems to have other priorities." "I have other priorities," he confirmed, holding the older woman's gaze. "Or perhaps I'm finally discovering what my priorities should have been from the beginning." A reflective silence followed his words. Finally, Victoria nodded. "I agreed to the interview, but with strict conditions, and I want editorial review before anything is published." "Of course," Alexander accepted. "I'll arrange everything for tomorrow." When Eleanor retired to the guest room and Victoria went up to check that Matthew was still sleeping, Alexander remained alone in the living room, contemplating the family photographs he had ignored for years. His father, a man of firm principles and hard work. His mother, warm and pragmatic in equal parts. What would they think of the current situation? Of the grandson they never knew? Of the man their son had become? For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to truly miss them, to feel the void they had left. And for the first time, he fully understood the value of what Matthew had brought into his life, not just the opportunity to be a father, but also to reconnect with his own history, with the parts of himself he had sacrificed on the altar of business success. The media storm continued raging outside, but within those familiar walls, Something fundamental was changing, rebuilding, healing. The interview was published 3 days later in Perspectives, a respected Sunday supplement, known for its journalistic integrity. The journalist, Laura Matthews, had kept her commitment to treat the subject with sensitivity and rigor, without sensationalism. The headline, sober and direct, established the tone. Alexander Blake speaks about fatherhood, second chances, and the priorities that really matter. The photograph accompanying the article showed Alexander and Victoria seated on the porch of the family home, with serene but determined expressions. As agreed, no image of Matthew appeared. The content of the interview was honest without being overly revealing. Alexander had admitted to not having known about the pregnancy, nevertheless assuming responsibility for creating a work environment where important communications were blocked. Victoria had confirmed her decision to raise Matthew independently after failing to contact the father, without seeking financial compensation or recognition. Together they had explained their current arrangement, gradually building a healthy family relationship centered on Matthew's well-being. No speculation about romantic reconciliation, no details about financial or legal agreements, just the simple truth of two adults trying to do the right thing for their child. The reaction was immediate. Other media picked up the story. The general tone changed from malicious speculation to cautious respect for a minor's privacy. Nicholas Rivers, now facing a defamation lawsuit and growing public criticism, issued an ambiguous statement that neither confirmed nor denied his involvement in the original leak. A week after the media explosion, Victoria and Matthew were able to return to their apartment. The press had lost interest, especially after Alexander's lawyers obtained injunctions prohibiting photographing the child or approaching his school. Alexander, however, did not immediately return to his penthouse. Something about the family home, about those days sharing space and routines with Victoria and Matthew, had awakened deep reflections that he needed to process. "Are you sure you want to remain here, sir?" asked James during one of his visits to review pending matters. "The penthouse has better facilities for teleworking." "I'm sure," Alexander confirmed, looking out the window of what had been his father's study. "I feel connected here to something important." The house, which for years had remained as a museum to his parents' memory, was beginning to feel alive again. He had replaced some furniture, updated the technology, but maintained the essence of the place. Warm, welcoming, designed to be truly inhabited. Sophia appeared unannounced one afternoon, her elegant sports car visibly out of place in the quiet residential neighborhood. "So it's true," she commented, after critically inspecting the living room. "You've installed yourself in this family relic." "It's temporary," Alexander responded, offering her a drink that she rejected with a gesture. "Is it?" Sophia questioned, her usual perspicacity intact. "Because you seem quite comfortable playing the perfect family." The interview was touching, by the way. I could almost hear the collective sighs of the housewives. Sarcasm was her usual defense mechanism, but Alexander detected something more beneath the surface. Pain, perhaps even genuine disappointment. "I'm not playing at anything, Sophia," he responded calmly. "I'm discovering who I really want to be." "And who is that?" "A suburban father who abandons everything he built." "It's not about abandoning anything," he corrected. "It's about building something more. Something that will last long after the last of my buildings has been demolished." Sophia studied him at length, as if re-evaluating the man in front of her. "I've never seen you like this," she finally admitted. "So convinced of something that can't be quantified on a balance sheet." "It's liberating," Alexander confessed. "Terrifying at times, but liberating." She nodded slowly. "I suppose this means our agreement has come to an end." It wasn't a question, but a statement. They both knew that their relationship, based mainly on social compatibility and mutual advantages, had no room for the complications of a child by another woman, especially when that other woman remained present in the equation. "I'm sorry, Sophia," Alexander said sincerely. "I never meant to hurt you." "You haven't hurt me, Alexander," she responded with dignity. "You've spared me a marriage that probably would have been perfectly respectable and perfectly empty." She headed toward the door, but stopped before leaving. "By the way, I've accepted directing the new contemporary art gallery in Paris. I leave next month." "Congratulations," he responded, genuinely happy for her. "You'll be extraordinary." When Sophia left, Alexander felt a strange sense of closure, as if a stage of his life, characterized by calculated decisions and contained emotions, had definitely ended. That same night, he received an unexpected call from Victoria. "Matthew has a fever," she informed without preamble. "It's not serious, but he keeps asking for you. Could you—" "I'm on my way," he responded immediately. Victoria's apartment welcomed him with dim lights and the low sound of classical music. Eleanor opened the door, her initial expression of caution transforming into something close to approval upon seeing him arrive with pharmacy bags. "He's in his bedroom," she indicated. "Victoria is with him. I'll bring tea." Matthew lay in his dinosaur bed, cheeks flushed with fever and bright eyes. His face lit up upon seeing Alexander. "Dad, you came." "Of course I came," Alexander responded, sitting on the edge of the bed and gently placing a hand on his forehead. "How are you feeling, champ?" "Hot, and my throat hurts, but Mum says it's not serious." Victoria, seated on the other side of the bed, smiled gratefully at Alexander. "Probably just a virus, but I preferred to keep him home as a precaution." And he wouldn't stop asking when you'd come. The following hours passed in a strange but comforting domesticity. Alexander reading stories to Matthew, applying cool compresses when the fever rose slightly, preparing the medicine following Victoria's instructions carefully. Eleanor, watching discreetly, her evaluative eyes gradually softening. By the time Matthew finally fell asleep, near midnight, a silent transformation had occurred. The three adults moved through the small apartment with the intuitive coordination of those who share a common purpose. "You should stay," Eleanor suggested when Alexander began looking for his keys. "It's late and Matthew will want to see you when he wakes up." The proposal, coming from the person who had the most reasons to distrust him, had a special weight. "The sofa is surprisingly comfortable," added Victoria, extending blankets and a pillow. "And there's freshly ground coffee for tomorrow." And so it was that Alexander Blake, the real estate magnate who owned properties on 3 continents, spent the night on a modest sofa in an apartment in the Old Town district. And it was, surprisingly, one of the best nights of his life. The next morning he awoke to the sound of voices in the kitchen. Matthew, apparently recovered, was animatedly explaining to his grandmother why Triceratops were clearly superior to Tyrannosaurus rex as potential pets. "Good morning, sleepyhead," the boy greeted upon seeing him appear, disheveled and with traces of sleep still visible. "Look, Grandma made dinosaur-shaped pancakes." Eleanor, wearing a flowery apron, handed him a cup of coffee without comment, but with a slight nod that could be interpreted as acceptance. Victoria entered at that moment, dressed for work in her workshop, and momentarily paused at seeing the domestic scene. "You seem surprised to see me here," Alexander commented quietly, while Matthew distracted Eleanor with more theories about dinosaurs. "It's not that," she responded, serving her own coffee. "It's seeing you like this and without the suit, without the facade. As if you belonged in this kitchen, in this routine." "Maybe because I do," he responded, the revelation surprising both him and her. Their gazes met over the steaming cups, and something passed between them, something unexpressed but intensely present. A mutual recognition that the carefully established boundaries were beginning to blur. The moment was interrupted by the apartment doorbell. Victoria frowned, clearly not expecting visitors so early. Upon opening the door, she found a messenger delivering an official envelope. Legal documents, as she discovered upon opening it in Alexander's presence. "What is this?" she asked, leafing through pages filled with legal jargon. "The paternity test results," he explained, "and the formal recognition documents. William has prepared them for submission to the civil registry." Victoria studied the papers with an inscrutable expression. "So it's official," she murmured. "Matthew Blake Miller." "Only if you agree," Alexander clarified. "I won't do anything without your consent." She looked up, her eyes full of complex emotions. "Why now, Alexander? Why not before or later? Why just at this moment in our lives?" The question contained much more than its literal meaning. It was an invitation to a deep honesty that could change everything between them. "Because now I'm able to see what truly matters," he responded. "Because now I understand that everything I built is empty if I have no one to share it with. Because now, finally, I'm ready to be the man that Matthew needs." He paused, gathering courage. "And perhaps, if I'm very lucky, the man you deserved 8 years ago." The words hung between them, loaded with possibilities. Victoria didn't respond immediately, but she didn't look away either. "Mom, can I show Dad my collection of space rocks?" Matthew's voice from the hallway broke the moment. "Sure, honey," she responded, her eyes still fixed on Alexander. "I think your dad would love to see them." The deliberate use of your dad didn't go unnoticed by either of them. A small but significant sign that something fundamental was changing between them. The announcement came a month later, when the media situation had calmed down, and the new family routine was beginning to consolidate. James entered the temporary office Alexander had established in the family home, his expression revealing the importance of the news before he even spoke. "We've won the New Dawn project bid," he informed, extending a tablet with the details. "The government has approved our proposal for the revitalization of the Harbour District." Alexander reviewed the information with professional interest. The New Dawn project was the decade's largest urban development initiative, transformation of old industrial docks into a mixed zone of affordable housing, cultural spaces, and sustainable green areas. The competition had been fierce, with international firms vying for the contract. "This is excellent news," he confirmed. "The team has worked tirelessly on this proposal." "There's an important detail," added James. "The contract signing and official launch are scheduled for next week, in Dubai." "Dubai?" Alexander frowned. "Why not here?" "The main investors are from the Middle East. They've insisted on formalizing the agreement there, with a full week of protocol activities and presentations to potential additional investors. Your presence is non-negotiable." Alexander consulted his calendar. The week in question included the school festival, where Matthew would present his science project on the solar system, an event for which they had been preparing together for weeks. "Couldn't we send the executive vice president?" he suggested, aware of how unthinkable this proposal would have been for him just a few months ago. "The investors have been explicit. They want Alexander Blake in person," James responded, clearly uncomfortable. "It's a $500 million project. The board of directors expects you to—" "I understand," Alexander interrupted. "Prepare the logistics. I'll confirm my decision this afternoon." When James withdrew, Alexander remained motionless, contemplating the dilemma he faced. The New Dawn project represented not only an enormous commercial opportunity, but also the consolidation of the new direction he had tried to give his company: sustainable development, accessible housing, community revitalization, instead of displacing gentrification. His phone vibrated with a message from Matthew, sent from Victoria's phone, a photograph of his nearly finished solar system model, with the message, "Just need to paint Saturn's rings. Will you come help me this afternoon? Love you, Dad." That night during dinner at Victoria's apartment, Alexander explained the situation, trying to make Matthew understand the complexity of his dilemma. "It's a very important project, one that will help many families have nice homes and parks to play in," he explained, carefully choosing his words. "But it means I would be away during the school festival." Matthew processed the information with a serious expression, his fork suspended halfway between the plate and his mouth. "Is it like when you have to choose between two good things, but you can only do one?" he finally asked. "Exactly like that," Alexander confirmed, impressed by the boy's intuition. "Teacher Sarah says that when that happens, you have to listen to your heart and not just your head," Matthew declared with the solemn wisdom of his 7 years. "What does your heart say, Dad?" The question, in its childlike simplicity, hit Alexander with unexpected force. What did his heart really say? 8 months ago, the answer would have been automatic. Business always comes first. But now, "My heart wants to be at your festival," he honestly admitted, "to see you present the project we've worked on together, but it also wants to make that big park a reality where many children like you could play." Victoria, who had been listening in silence, intervened. "Perhaps there's an intermediate solution," she suggested. "The festival lasts all day. Matthew's presentation is at 11 a.m. Couldn't you schedule your trip to leave that same afternoon?" "I would miss the first meeting in Dubai," Alexander considered. "But I could arrive for the main sessions." His business mind, accustomed to optimizing every situation, began evaluating alternatives. "And you could see my presentation by video," added Matthew enthusiastically. "Grandma Eleanor always records everything with her tablet." "It's not the same as being there," Alexander objected. surprised by his own resistance to the pragmatic solution he would have adopted without hesitation before. But it's better than nothing, Victoria reasoned. And it would teach Matthew something important, that sometimes, with creativity and commitment, we can find ways to fulfill various responsibilities without completely sacrificing any. That night, as he drove back to the family home, Alexander reflected on the evolution of his priorities. 6 months ago, he wouldn't even have considered missing a day of negotiations for a school event. Now, even the compromise solution felt painful, imperfect. He called James past midnight. "I need you to reorganize the Dubai trip," he instructed. "I'll leave on the day of the festival after Matthew's presentation. You arrive on the first day, explain the situation, and assure them I'll be there for the main negotiations. And prepare a high-quality video conference so I can participate remotely in that first meeting, if absolutely necessary." "Sir, the investors expect to work with a man of principles," Alexander interrupted firmly. "And my current principle is that I will not fail my son. Make it work, James." The day of the school festival dawned radiant. The Rainbow Elementary schoolyard had been transformed into a science fair, with student projects displayed on colorful tables. Matthew, nervous but excited, reviewed his presentation while Alexander adjusted the final details of his elaborate solar system model. "Remember, the planets aren't really aligned like this," he patiently explained. "But we've placed them this way so they can all be clearly seen." Victoria observed the interaction from a few steps away, a soft smile on her face. Eleanor, beside her, commented in a low voice, "I never imagined I would come to say this, but they make a good team." "I know," Victoria responded. "It's surprising how he's changed, how they've both changed." Matthew's presentation was a resounding success. With unusual confidence for his age, he explained not only the planets and their characteristics, but also more advanced concepts like solar gravity and elliptical orbits, topics he had researched with Alexander during their afternoons together. When he finished, he received an enthusiastic ovation from classmates and teachers. His proud smile as he looked at his parents was worth more than any multi-million-dollar contract. "Did you see, Dad? I remembered all the facts about Neptune." "You were amazing," Alexander confirmed, hugging him with genuine pride. A true scientist. The farewell, though planned, proved more difficult than Alexander had anticipated. His car waited at the school exit, ready to take him directly to the airport. "I'll be back in a week," he promised Matthew, crouching down to his height. "And we'll talk by video every night, okay?" The boy nodded, his expression mixing understanding and sadness. "Bring photos of Dubai," he requested. "We're learning about different countries in class." "I'll bring photos, videos, and maybe even a small piece of desert," Alexander promised. "And when I return, we'll dedicate an entire day to whatever you want to do." As he straightened up, he met Victoria's gaze. "Thank you for staying for his presentation," she said. "It meant a lot to him." "And to me," Alexander responded. "More than I can express." A moment of silence loaded with meaning settled between them. "Victoria, when I return, I'd like us to talk. About us. About possibilities." She visibly held her breath but didn't look away. "I'll be here," she responded simply. The trip to Dubai was a succession of marathon meetings, technical presentations, and complex negotiations. Alexander participated with his usual professional acuity, but those who knew him well noticed subtle differences. He frequently consulted his watch to calculate the time at home. He excused himself punctually every night for his video calls with Matthew, and he had politely declined invitations to social events that would have extended his stay. On the last day, while signing the final documents of the agreement, he received a message from James. "Urgent problem with the Old Town District project. Needs your immediate attention upon return." The return flight became an improvised work session, reviewing documents about the mentioned project, an urban renewal initiative in the historic Old Town District, where Victoria had her workshop. Something in the new plans caught his attention. An entire section of the neighborhood, precisely where Victoria's building was located, was marked for Commercial Renewal Phase 2. Upon landing, he headed directly to the central offices, where James awaited him with a worried expression. "The board approved the modifications to the master plan during your absence," he explained. The development director argued, that the return on investment significantly improved with the reconversion of that area into premium commercial space. Alexander studied the plans with growing consternation. This modification would displace dozens of traditional businesses and residents, he observed, including Victoria's workshop. The plan includes compensations and indemnities, James clarified. Generous by market standards. It's not just about money, Alexander responded, a realization crystallizing in his mind. It's about community, history, human connections, about homes, not just housing. The irony didn't escape him. For years, he had driven precisely this type of development, elegant, profitable, transforming entire neighborhoods into more lucrative but less authentic versions of themselves. Now he contemplated the consequences from a completely different perspective. Convene an extraordinary meeting of the board of directors, he instructed James, and prepare an alternative presentation. We're going to completely rethink this project. That same afternoon, after meeting with his technical team to outline a radically different approach for the Old Town District, Alexander headed to Victoria's workshop. He needed to see her, explain the situation, assure her he would protect her space and her community. Upon arriving, he found the place unusually closed early. A neighbor informed him that Victoria had picked up Matthew from school, and both had hurriedly departed for the hospital. Grandma Eleanor had an accident, the man explained. Nothing serious, as I understood, but enough to scare them. St. Raphael Hospital, where everything had begun months ago, received Alexander with its familiar antiseptic atmosphere. In the emergency waiting room, he found Matthew, downcast and worried, sitting next to an older woman he recognized as Victoria's neighbor. "Dad!" exclaimed the boy upon seeing him running into his arms. Grandma Eleanor fell on the stairs. "Mom is with her now." Alexander hugged him firmly, offering the security the little one clearly needed. "Everything will be all right," he assured, though without specific information. "Your grandmother is a strong woman." As if invoked by his words, Victoria appeared in the hallway, her expression revealing relief upon seeing Alexander. "Wrist fracture and some contusions," she informed. "Nothing requiring surgery, but she'll need help for a few weeks." "She can stay at the family house," Alexander offered without hesitation. "There's plenty of space and Margaret could help with the care." Victoria seemed surprised by the spontaneous offer. "Are you sure? My mother can be quite independent, and frankly, a bit difficult as a patient." "Completely sure," he confirmed. In fact, he momentarily hesitated before continuing. "Perhaps you could all stay there during this period. It would be easier to coordinate care, and Matthew wouldn't have to be going back and forth." The proposal hung between them, loaded with implications that went far beyond a temporary practical arrangement. "We'll have to consult with my mother," Victoria responded cautiously. "You know how she is with her independence." To everyone's surprise, Eleanor accepted the offer with a grace that contradicted her reputation for stubbornness. Perhaps the pain and medication had softened her usual objections, or perhaps there were other considerations in her decision. "Only until I can fend for myself," she clarified, as they helped her settle into the master bedroom of the family home. "I won't become a permanent burden." "You would never be a burden, Eleanor," Alexander responded sincerely. "This house has been too empty for too long." The following days established a new family dynamic. Matthew, delighted to have his parents and grandmother under the same roof, visibly flourished. Victoria and Alexander developed a complementary routine, naturally coordinating responsibilities without the need for explicit negotiations. And Eleanor, although initially reluctant, gradually began sharing family stories during dinners, revealing facets of Victoria that Alexander had never known. It was during one of these dinners when Alexander finally shared the news about the Old Town District project. "My company had planned a renovation that would have seriously affected the neighborhood," he explained, carefully observing the reactions, "including the building where your workshop and apartment are." Victoria set her fork down midway. "You were going to demolish our home." Her voice mixed incredulity and a shadow of the old distrust. "Not me personally," he clarified. "The board of directors approved the plan during my absence in Dubai, but yes, that was the original plan before I knew about it." "And now?" Eleanor asked directly, her penetrating gaze despite the pain she still felt. "Now I'm completely reorienting the project," Alexander responded. "Instead of demolishing and rebuilding, We'll propose respectful restoration, infrastructure improvements while maintaining the historical character, and support for traditional businesses so they can modernize without losing their essence. Can you do that? Victoria asked. Change an already approved plan? I'm the executive president and majority shareholder, he responded with a small smile. I can try. And I have good arguments: sustainability, social responsibility, heritage preservation, and long-term profitability instead of quick gains. Does that mean we won't have to move? Matthew intervened, who had followed the conversation with surprising attention. Exactly, Alexander confirmed. And in fact, your mum could have a larger workshop if she wants, with better lighting for her creations. And you would continue living exactly where you are now. Later that night, when Matthew was asleep and Eleanor had retired to her room, Alexander and Victoria found themselves alone on the back porch, contemplating the garden illuminated by the moon. Why didn't you tell me before about the project? She finally asked. Honestly, I didn't know, he confessed. The Old Town District was just one of dozens of initiatives in the portfolio. I never connected that your building was in that area until I saw the detailed plans upon returning from Dubai. Victoria nodded slowly, processing the information. It's strange to think that you could have been responsible for displacing us without even knowing it, she reflected, as if our worlds had been on a collision course from the beginning. Or perhaps on a convergence course, Alexander suggested. Two realities that needed to meet and transform each other. She looked at him with renewed interest. You've become quite philosophical for a real estate magnate, she observed with a slight smile. I have a good teacher, he responded. A 7-year-old one who asks impossible questions about the universe and why people do what they do. Victoria's smile widened. He's good at that, isn't he? The best, Alexander confirmed, and then gathering courage. Victoria, I mentioned before that I wanted to talk about possibilities. She nodded, her expression turning serious. I remember. These months have been transformative, he continued. Not just because of Matthew, although he has been the catalyst for everything. Also for rediscovering you, seeing the extraordinary woman you've become. The exceptional mother, the talented artist, the person of integrity and courage. Alexander, she began, but he gently raised a hand. Please, let me finish. I'm not proposing to pick up where we left off 8 years ago. That would be impossible. We're both different people now. What I propose is to explore who we are today together, to build something new not out of obligation toward Matthew, but by mutual choice. If you also desire it. The silence that followed seemed to contain all the weight of their shared history, the youthful love, the painful separation, the years of absence, and these months of mutual rediscovery. I'm afraid, Victoria finally admitted, her voice barely audible. Afraid of trusting again and having priorities change once more. Afraid for Matthew, who is now so attached to you. Afraid for myself because I never stopped. She interrupted herself, but the unspoken words hung between them, almost tangible in the night air. I'm afraid too, Alexander confessed. Afraid of not measuring up, of disappointing the people who matter most to me. But I've learned that some things are worth it even with fear, especially with fear. Slowly, as if time itself had slowed down, Alexander extended his hand toward her. A simple gesture but loaded with meaning. An invitation, not a demand. A possibility, not a certainty. After what seemed like an eternity, Victoria interlaced her fingers with his. One day at a time, she said softly. No grand promises, no elaborate plans. Just us, discovering this new path together. In that simple contact, in those cautious but hopeful words, something fundamental changed. It wasn't a guaranteed happy ending, but perhaps something more valuable. An honest beginning. The transition wasn't immediate or perfect. During the following weeks, while Eleanor recovered in the family home, Victoria and Matthew continued dividing their time between their and their own apartment in the Old Town district. This duality of spaces reflected the tentative nature of the new arrangements. A bridge between separate worlds, not yet a complete integration. Alexander simultaneously faced his own professional challenges. The extraordinary board meeting to reconsider the Old Town District project had been tense, with several members openly questioning whether his personal circumstances were clouding his business judgment. The revised plan reduces our projected return on investment By almost 15%, argued Charles Montgomery, the financial director, with evident frustration. All to preserve buildings that frankly have passed their useful life. What it reduces is our immediate return, Alexander corrected with studied calmness. The sustainable restoration approach positions us for government incentives, improves our corporate image, and creates a precedent of responsible development that will benefit us in future bids. Not to mention that it avoids the displacement of families and businesses that have been there for generations, added Lucy Harrison, the youngest board member and an unexpected ally in this new vision. Something that residents, the press and local authorities will value positively. The final vote was close, 6 in favor, 5 against. The revised project would move forward, but Alexander knew he had burned considerable political capital in the process. Some of the more traditional shareholders clearly doubted his new direction. That night, he shared these details with Victoria as they walked through the back garden after putting Matthew to bed. "Do you regret it?" she asked after listening attentively. "I would have understood if you had opted for the path of least resistance." "Not for a moment," he responded with conviction. "What surprises me is how much my perspective has changed. A year ago, I wouldn't even have questioned the original plan." "Parenthood changes people," Victoria observed. "It makes you think about legacies, about what kind of world you're helping to build." "It's not just parenthood," Alexander corrected, stopping to look at her directly. "It's rediscovering what it really means to create value, not just for shareholders or financial statements, but for people, for entire communities." Victoria smiled, an expression that mixed surprise and something close to pride. "Careful, Alexander. You're starting to sound almost idealistic." "Maybe I always was beneath all that armor of cynical pragmatism," he suggested, only half joking. The full moon bathed the garden in a silver light, transforming the ordinary into something close to magical. Driven by the moment, Alexander slowly leaned toward Victoria. She didn't back away. Their lips met in a tentative exploratory kiss, very different from the passionate exchanges of their previous relationship. This kiss contained history, awareness, and a new form of mutual vulnerability. When they separated, both seemed slightly surprised by the step they had just taken. "Too soon?" he asked, suddenly unsure. "I don't know," she responded honestly. "This is all uncharted territory. We could explore the map together," Alexander suggested, gently taking her hand. The sound of the back door opening interrupted the moment. Eleanor appeared on the threshold, her cast arm contrasting with the elegant robe she wore. "Sorry to interrupt," she commented, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But there's a call for you, Alexander, something about an emergency in the Dubai project." Reality always found ways to remind them that, however idyllic these shared moments were, the outside world continued spinning with its own demands and complications. The days acquired their own rhythm. In the mornings, Alexander took Matthew to school before heading to the office, a ritual that both cherished. Victoria divided her time between her workshop, now part of the pilot plan for improvements in the Old Town district, and the family home, where Eleanor continued her recovery under Margaret's solicitous but discreet attention. Dinners became the anchor that united their days, a time when everyone shared experiences, frustrations, and small triumphs. To everyone's surprise, Eleanor and Margaret had developed an unexpected friendship, exchanging recipes, stories, and opinions on child-rearing, and occasionally on the adults who still needed some guidance. "You two conspiring seriously worries me," Alexander commented one night, observing the two older women engrossed in what appeared to be a critical evaluation of his domestic management. "You should be worried," Eleanor confirmed with an astute smile. "We're comparing notes on how stubborn you are now and how stubborn you were as a child, according to Margaret." "Confirming that some things never change," added Margaret with affection. Matthew, delighted with this multi-generational dynamic, absorbed every story, every interaction like a sponge. His confidence visibly grew, nurtured by the stability that was gradually consolidating around him. The Old Town District project began showing tangible results. Historic facades restored with traditional techniques, discreetly modernized infrastructure, small local businesses revitalized with current technology, but maintaining their original character. The residents, initially skeptical, gradually began to appreciate a type of development that respected their community instead of replacing it. Victoria's workshop flourished, becoming a focal point for local artisans. Her new collection, inspired by the neighborhood's traditional architecture, received national and even international attention, with a prestigious New York gallery requesting exclusive pieces. "You could expand significantly," Alexander commented one afternoon, watching her work on a particularly complex pendant. "The demand clearly exists." She considered the suggestion while meticulously adjusting a small stone. "I could, but I don't want to sacrifice the essence of what I do. Each piece needs time, personal attention." She made a significant pause. "Though I have been thinking about taking an apprentice or two, transmitting the knowledge, creating opportunities for young people from the neighborhood." "A different form of expansion," Alexander observed. "Growth through impact, not just volume." "Exactly," Victoria confirmed, and both recognized that they were applying similar principles in their respective fields, each in their own way. As the date approached to definitively move into their newly renovated house, Alexander faced an important symbolic decision: what to do with his penthouse. The luxurious apartment had remained mostly empty for months, a monument to his former life. "You could sell it," Victoria suggested as they packed Matthew's last belongings in the family home, "or rent it. It would surely generate significant income." Alexander considered both options, but neither completely resonated. Finally, a casual conversation with Lucy Harrison during a work meeting provided the inspiration he was seeking. "We're looking for spaces for the artist residency program we want to implement as part of the Old Town District project," she had mentioned. "Something inspiring, where international artists can stay while collaborating with local artisans." The solution was perfect: transform the symbol of his former isolation into a bridge between worlds, a space where traditional and contemporary art could dialogue and mutually enrich each other. When he shared the idea with Victoria, her face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "It's brilliant," she affirmed. "And I could help coordinate the collaborations between visiting artists and neighborhood artisans." Thus, another piece of the new mosaic of their lives found its place, transforming what could have been a complete break with the past into a reinvented continuity. The afternoon before the definitive move, Alexander received an unexpected call. It was Catherine, his former secretary, now retired. "Mr. Blake, excuse the intrusion," she began formally, as was her custom. "But I've been following the changes in the company, and I wanted to express my admiration for the new direction." The comment surprised him. Catherine had always been extremely reserved, rarely offering personal opinions. "It means a lot coming from you, Catherine," he responded sincerely. "You were with the company since my father's time." "That's precisely why I'm calling," she continued. "Your father would be proud, sir. Not of the material success, which was always just a means for him, but of seeing that you finally rediscovered the fundamental principles that inspired the company's foundation, building to improve lives, not just structures." The words touched something deep in Alexander, an invisible wound that was finally beginning to heal. The implicit approval from the person who had best known his parents validated his transformation in a way that no financial success could match. "Thank you, Catherine," he responded, the emotion evident in his voice. "I needed to hear that more than I imagined." That night, as he contemplated for the last time the garden of the family home, where the old swing continued to sway gently in the night breeze, Alexander reflected on the extraordinary journey he had undertaken since that casual encounter at the hospital. The time had come for the final choice. Not between careers or houses or lifestyles, but the most fundamental choice of all. The choice of who he truly wanted to be, what legacy he wanted to build, what values would guide every future decision. And in the stillness of that night, surrounded by the benevolent ghosts of his past and the luminous promises of his future, Alexander Blake made his definitive choice. The situation came to a critical point during an extraordinary meeting specifically convened to debate the company's strategic direction. "The numbers are clear," argued Charles, projecting graphs that showed a comparative of returns. "Since we implemented the new socially responsible approach, our margins have been reduced by an average of 12%. Shareholders deserve better results." Alexander observed the faces around the table. Some nodded in agreement with Charles, while others seemed uncomfortable, caught between personal convictions and financial interests. "If you only look at the last quarter, you're right," Alexander conceded, standing up. But the transformation we're implementing isn't about immediate profits. It's about long-term sustainability, both financial and social. Calmly, he replaced Charles's graphs with his own data. These are the 5-year projections. Our current approach positions us to access sustainable development funds, government incentives for affordable housing, and partnerships with international organizations. He made a strategic pause. More importantly, we're creating a replicable model that will soon be the industry standard, not an exception. The tension in the room was palpable. Lucy Harrison, who had become his most visible ally, intervened. Consumers and clients are increasingly aware of the social impact of their decisions. Building a brand associated with responsible development is a long-term competitive advantage. Charles wasn't convinced. Nice words. But while we build brand, River's development is capturing projects that should be ours, offering superior margins to investors looking for concrete results, not fashionable philosophies. The mention of his rival touched a sensitive nerve. Nicholas Rivers had been strategically taking advantage of Blake Construction's transition, presenting himself as the pragmatic alternative for impatient investors. "We've reached a point where we must decide," Charles continued, sensing he had touched a vulnerable point. "Are we a construction company or a charitable organization? Because we can't be both simultaneously." The room fell silent, all eyes directed at Alexander. It was the defining moment he had been anticipating, the direct confrontation between his old vision of success and the new perspective he had developed. "You're wrong, Charles," he finally responded, his voice quiet but firm. "Not only can we be both things, we must be. The future of construction isn't in extracting maximum short-term profit, but in creating lasting value for entire communities." He walked to the window, briefly contemplating the city he had helped transform, before turning back to the board. "I propose a clear choice. We can revert to our old practices, maximizing quarterly earnings at the expense of displaced families and destroyed neighborhoods. Or we can lead the transformation of our industry, demonstrating that responsible development can also be profitable." He took an envelope from his jacket and placed it on the table. "My resignation letter is here. If the board decides my vision no longer aligns with that of the company my family founded." The bold gesture provoked surprised murmurs. "But also here is my detailed plan for the next 3 years, demonstrating how we can achieve sustainable profitability while positively transforming the communities where we operate." The meeting extended for hours, with heated debates and exhaustive analyses. In the end, the vote was 7-4 in favor of Alexander's plan. Not an overwhelming victory, but enough to continue the path he had chosen. When he finally returned home that night, he found Victoria on the porch, waiting for him with 2 steaming cups of tea. She had learned to read his expressions well enough to know that something significant had happened. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked simply. Alexander sat beside her, gratefully accepting the hot cup. "I put my career on the line today," he confessed. "I offered my resignation if the board didn't support our new direction." Victoria looked at him with a mixture of surprise and something deeper, pride, perhaps. "That was risky," she commented. "What would you have done if they had accepted it?" The question made him smile because during the tense hours of debate, he had contemplated precisely that possibility. "I would have started something new. A smaller development company, but completely aligned with my current values." He took a sip of tea before continuing. "In fact, I'm still considering that option for the future." "Leaving the empire you built?" Victoria seemed genuinely surprised. "That would be revolutionary." "Everything in my life has been revolutionary lately," he responded, seeking her gaze. "You, Matthew, this house we're building together. You've taught me that sometimes letting go of what you thought was important is the first step to finding what truly is." The silence that followed was full of shared understanding. Finally, Victoria spoke. "There's something I've been wanting to show you," she said, extracting a small object from her pocket. "I finished it today." In her palm rested an extraordinary ring, white gold worked in intricate patterns reminiscent of constellations, with small stones strategically inlaid. "It's the constellation that was visible the night Matthew was born," she explained, "and also the one that shone when we met, so long ago. The same configuration of stars, 8 years apart." Alexander took the ring with reverence, immediately recognizing the profound meaning of the piece. "It's Perfect, he murmured, studying the meticulous details. Is it for you? She confirmed. Her reminder that some connections are written in the stars, even when we take time to recognize them. The gesture contained multiple meanings: acceptance, commitment, promise of a shared future. It wasn't a traditional proposal, but something more authentic for their unique story. I'll never take it off, Alexander promised, sliding it onto his finger. That night, while Matthew slept in his temporary room and the renovation of their new house progressed a few streets away, Alexander and Victoria silently sealed their mutual choice. Not with grand declarations or elaborate plans, but with the quiet certainty of those who have found their shared path after many detours. The following morning brought an unexpected surprise. Eleanor, who had been unusually quiet during the family dinner, announced her decision. "I've decided to sell my apartment," she declared, while serving coffee in the kitchen. "It's time this old lady stopped living alone." Victoria almost spilled her cup. "Mum, what are you saying? You've always valued your independence above everything." "And I still value it," Eleanor responded with dignity. "But I also value seeing my grandson grow up. And frankly, having my own space in that new house you're renovating could be useful. The ground floor has a room with a separate entrance that would be perfect for a meddlesome but helpful grandmother." The proposal momentarily left both Victoria and Alexander speechless. It was Matthew who broke the silence, entering the kitchen in pajamas. "Is Grandma going to live with us?" he asked, catching fragments of the conversation. "Great. You can teach me to make more cookies and tell me stories every night." The adults exchanged glances, recognizing the innate wisdom of the child. Perhaps true family wasn't just the traditional unit, but the complete circle of people who chose each other, day after day. "If you're sure, Mom," Victoria began. "More sure than ever," Eleanor confirmed. "Besides, someone has to make sure this reformed businessman doesn't relapse into his old overworking habits." The joke contained a grain of truth that everyone recognized. Personal transformations, however profound, always required vigilance and continued support. As Matthew dragged his grandmother to show her his latest astronomical drawing, Alexander and Victoria were left alone in the kitchen. "Do you think it will work?" she asked. A question that encompassed much more than just the living arrangement. This family we're building, so different from the conventional. Alexander considered the question seriously. "I think it will work precisely because it's different," he responded. "Because it's consciously built, piece by piece, choice after choice. Not following a predetermined blueprint, but creating our own." "A custom-made blueprint," Victoria smiled, recognizing the architectural metaphor. "Exactly," Alexander confirmed. "And the best buildings are always those specifically designed for those who will inhabit them, not generic copies of some pre-established model." The analogy was perfect for what they were building together, a unique family, designed not according to external expectations, but according to their own shared needs and values. The Old Town District project began showing tangible results. Historic facades restored with traditional techniques, discreetly modernized infrastructure, small local businesses revitalized with current technology, but maintaining their original character. The residents, initially skeptical, gradually began to appreciate a type of development that respected their community instead of replacing it. Victoria's workshop flourished, becoming a focal point for local artisans. Her new collection, inspired by the neighborhood's traditional architecture, received national and even international attention, with a prestigious New York gallery requesting exclusive pieces. "You could expand significantly," Alexander commented one afternoon, watching her work on a particularly complex pendant. "The demand clearly exists." She considered the suggestion while meticulously adjusting a small stone. "I could, but I don't want to sacrifice the essence of what I do. Each piece needs time, personal attention." She made a significant pause. "Though I have been thinking about taking an apprentice or two, transmitting the knowledge, creating opportunities for young people from the neighborhood." "A different form of expansion," Alexander observed. "Growth through impact, not just volume." "Exactly," Victoria confirmed, and both recognized that they were applying similar principles in their respective fields, each in their own way. As the date to definitively move into their newly renovated house approached, Alexander faced an important symbolic decision: what to do with his penthouse. The luxurious apartment had remained mostly empty for months. a monument to his former life. You could sell it, Victoria suggested, as they packed the last of Matthew's belongings in the family home. Or rent it. It would surely generate significant income. Alexander considered both options, but neither completely resonated. Finally, a casual conversation with Lucy during a work meeting provided the inspiration he sought. We're looking for spaces for the artist residency program we want to implement as part of the Old Town District project, she had mentioned. Something inspiring, where international artists can stay while collaborating with local artisans. The solution was perfect. Transform the symbol of his former isolation into a bridge between worlds, a space where traditional and contemporary art could dialogue and mutually enrich each other. When he shared the idea with Victoria, her face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "It's brilliant," she affirmed. "And I could help coordinate the collaborations between visiting artists and neighborhood artisans." Thus, another piece of the new mosaic of their lives found its place, transforming what could have been a complete break with the past into a reinvented continuity. The afternoon before the definitive move, Alexander received an unexpected call. It was Catherine, his former secretary, now retired. "Mr. Blake, excuse the intrusion," she began formally, as was her custom. "But I've been following the changes in the company and I wanted to express my admiration for the new direction." The comment surprised him. Catherine had always been extremely reserved, rarely offering personal opinions. "It means a lot coming from you, Catherine," he responded sincerely. "You were with the company since my father's time." "That's precisely why I'm calling," she continued. "Your father would be proud, sir. Not of the material success, which was always just a means for him, but of seeing that you finally rediscovered the fundamental principles that inspired the company's foundation, building to improve lives, not just structures." The words touched something deep in Alexander, an invisible wound that was finally beginning to heal. The implicit approval from the person who had best known his parents validated his transformation in a way that no financial success could match. "Thank you, Catherine," he responded, the emotion evident in his voice. "I needed to hear that more than I imagined." That night, as he contemplated for the last time the garden of the family home, where the old swing continued to sway gently in the night breeze, Alexander reflected on the extraordinary journey he had undertaken since that casual encounter at the hospital. The time had come for the final choice. Not between careers or houses or lifestyles, but the most fundamental choice of all. The choice of who he truly wanted to be, what legacy he wanted to build, what values would guide every future decision. And in the stillness of that night, surrounded by the benevolent ghosts of his past and the luminous promises of his future, Alexander Blake made his definitive choice. 5 years later, the garden of the house gleamed under the spring sun, decorated with colorful garlands and tables arranged under the leafy trees. A handmade banner proclaimed, "Happy Birthday, Matthew," in bright letters, some of which had slightly run due to the artistic enthusiasm of the birthday boy himself. Alexander observed the scene from the terrace, a cup of coffee in hand and a reflective smile on his face. The years had added some gray to his temples, expression lines around his eyes, but also a serenity that the former Alexander would have found incomprehensible. "Thoughtful?" Victoria's voice pulled him from his reverie as she joined him, sliding an arm around his waist with comfortable familiarity. "Remembering," he corrected, gently kissing her forehead. "The day I first saw him in the hospital, how everything changed in an instant." Victoria nodded, following his gaze to the center of the garden, where Matthew, now a 12-year-old pre-teen with his energy and curiosity intact, was organizing an elaborate game with his friends. A few meters away, Eleanor supervised the refreshment table, giving precise instructions to the waiters hired for the occasion with the authority that only a grandmother can exercise. "It was a good change," Victoria commented, resting her head on Alexander's shoulder. "The best," he confirmed, the constellation ring gleaming on his hand as he interlaced his fingers with hers, where a complementary ring had rested for 3 years, when they had finally formalized their union in an intimate ceremony in the newly finished garden. The house had become exactly what they had imagined, a space that combined contemporary elegance with traditional warmth. The ground floor included Eleanor's independent but connected apartment, who maintained her precious autonomy while remaining fully integrated into family life. Victoria's studio occupied a luminous annex with large windows facing the garden, where she now worked with two talented apprentices from the neighborhood. The sound of children's laughter drew their attention to the farthest end of the garden, where Claire, their 3-year-old daughter, was trying to follow her older brother and his friends, determined not to miss any adventure despite her short legs. "Be careful with your sister, Matthew," Victoria called, receiving a confirmation gesture from the pre-teen, who immediately adjusted the game to include the little one. The bond between the siblings was one of the greatest treasures of their family life. Despite the age difference, Matthew had adopted his role as big brother with a seriousness and devotion that moved everyone. For Claire, he was simultaneously hero, teacher, and best friend. "What time are James and Lucy arriving?" Alexander asked, checking his watch. "They said at 4, Victoria responded. Lucy wanted to stop by the exhibition at the Old Town Cultural Center first. The mention of the Cultural Center elicited a smile of shared pride. The former abandoned warehouse had been transformed into a vibrant community space, the centerpiece of the renovated Old Town district. It combined an art gallery, artisanal workshops, a library, and educational spaces accessible to all residents. A flagship project of the new Blake Foundation, established 3 years ago when Alexander had finally decided to leave the executive presidency of the construction company. The transition had been less dramatic than many expected. After carefully preparing his successor, Lucy Harrison, who had demonstrated sharing his vision of sustainable development, Alexander had redirected his energy toward the foundation, focusing on respectful urban revitalization projects in historical neighborhoods of different cities. The change allowed him to better balance his professional and family life, something unthinkable in his former existence. Although he still worked intensely on projects that passionate him, he could now adjust his schedule to be present for important moments, school plays, medical appointments, or simply ordinary afternoons sharing homework and family dinners. The doorbell announced the arrival of the first guests. Margaret, who continued to be an integral part of their family now as a part-time domestic assistant and honorary grandmother, according to Matthew, hurried to open the door. The party soon came fully to life. Matthew's schoolmates, family friends, neighborhood artisans with their children, foundation colleagues, an eclectic mix that reflected the diverse circles that now naturally intertwined in their lives. Among the crowd, Alexander distinguished James, who after a brief period of estrangement had returned as director of special projects at the foundation, contributing his legendary organizational efficiency to causes that now genuinely passionate him. Beside him, his wife Laura conversed animatedly with Eleanor about urban gardening techniques. In a quieter corner, Lucy Harrison, now CEO of Blake Construction, shared ideas with a group of young architects associated with the affordable housing program. Under her leadership, the company had not only recovered but surpassed its previous valuation, demonstrating that responsible development could also be financially viable. "Dad, come!" Matthew's voice interrupted his observation. "I want to show you something before blowing out the candles." Alexander let himself be guided through the guests to a separate table where a structure covered with a cloth waited. With a theatrical gesture, Matthew removed the cloth, revealing an extraordinarily detailed model. The Old Town district in miniature, with its winding streets, restored historic buildings, and new community spaces harmoniously integrated. "We made it with the social science class," Matthew explained proudly. "It's our project on sustainable urban development. We used your foundation as a case study." Alexander observed in wonder the level of detail. Victoria's workshop, the cultural center, even the small bakery where the owner still saved the first sweetbread for Matthew every morning he passed by there. "It's extraordinary," he murmured, genuinely impressed. "You perfectly captured the essence of the neighborhood. The teacher says it demonstrates how development can preserve history and community instead of destroying them," Matthew continued, and then added with an astute smile, "I told her I learned that from you." The words touched something deep in Alexander. Of all the legacies he could leave, this one, transmitted through his son, was perhaps the most significant. The time to blow out the candles arrived with the traditional gathering around the cake. Claire insisted on helping her brother, strategically positioning herself beside him, while Victoria lit the 12 colorful candles. "Make a wish," Eleanor reminded, following the family tradition. Matthew briefly closed his eyes, an expression of concentration similar to Victoria's when working on a particularly delicate piece. Then, with a decisive blow aided by Claire's excessive enthusiasm, he extinguished all the candles, provoking applause and cheers from the guests. Later, when the party began to wind down and some guests were saying goodbye, Alexander found Matthew sitting on the old swing that had been moved from the family home, contemplating the sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. "May I?" he asked, indicating the space next to him on the double swing. Matthew nodded, moving to make room. For a few moments they swung in comfortable complicity. "Can I ask you something, Dad?" Matthew finally said. "Anything you want," Alexander responded, recognizing the tone that indicated one of his son's characteristic deep questions. "Do you think things would have been better if you had been with us from the beginning? If you had never missed those first years?" The question, unexpected and direct, deserved an equally honest answer. "It would have been different," Alexander responded after careful consideration, "and having known you from birth would have been an incalculable gift that I will always regret having lost." He paused, carefully choosing his next words. "But I'm not sure it would have been better. The man I was then wasn't ready to be the father you needed. I needed those years, and then the shock of discovering you to transform into someone capable of truly valuing what matters." Matthew nodded slowly, processing the answer with the seriousness that characterized him. "Like when you build something," he reflected. "Sometimes you need to tear down first to make stronger foundations." "Exactly," Alexander confirmed, once again impressed by his son's intuitive wisdom. "Sometimes the longer path turns out to be the right one, even if it doesn't seem so while you're traveling it." Matthew swung thoughtfully for a few moments before sharing, "Do you know what I wished for when I blew out the candles?" "I thought birthday wishes were secrets," Alexander responded with feigned surprise. "This one can be told because it already came true," Matthew explained with impeccable logic. "I wish to have exactly the family I have. I wouldn't change anything, not even the difficult parts." The words, pronounced with the absolute sincerity of youth, resonated deeply with Alexander. Of all the recognitions received in his life, awards, million-dollar contracts, articles in prestigious magazines, none compared to this simple acceptance from his son. From the terrace, Victoria watched them with Claire asleep in her arms, the little one exhausted from the excitement of the party. Eleanor silently joined her side, following her gaze to the two figures on the swing. "Who would have imagined this picture 6 years ago?" commented the older woman, wisdom and satisfaction in her voice. "Certainly not me," Victoria admitted. "I was so afraid when I saw him in the hospital that day, so afraid he would choose his world over us again." "And yet he didn't," Eleanor observed. "Or perhaps he finally understood he didn't have to choose, that he could build a bridge between both worlds instead of a wall." Victoria nodded, gently rocking Claire, who murmured something unintelligible in her sleep. In the garden, Alexander and Matthew had abandoned the swing and were now lying on the grass, identifying constellations in the increasingly starry night sky. Their voices reached as distant murmurs, Matthew's enthusiasm audible even from afar, as he pointed out some particularly interesting celestial pattern. The contrast with that first night in the hospital, when Victoria had protectively fled with Matthew in her arms, couldn't be more pronounced. Where there had been fear and distrust before, now a quiet confidence flourished. Where there had been invisible but impenetrable walls between different worlds, now solid bridges existed, traveled daily in both directions. The house they had renovated together stood as a physical symbol of this integration, preserving valuable historical elements while incorporating new structures that expanded possibilities without destroying foundations. A home that honored the past while embracing the future, exactly like the family that inhabited it. As the night progressed and the stars shone with increasing intensity over the garden, Victoria reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. A casual encounter that had triggered profound transformations, revealing essential truths that were present from the beginning, though temporarily obscured by circumstances and past choices. When Alexander and Matthew finally returned to the house, their faces illuminated by the shared enthusiasm of their astronomical explorations, Victoria welcomed them with a smile that contained all the gratitude and hope she felt. Not for a perfect ending. She knew real life didn't offer such conclusions. but for a genuine present and a future open to possibilities they would continue building together day by day. Later that night, with the children asleep and the house quiet, Alexander and Victoria found themselves on the terrace, contemplating the now empty garden, but full of echoes of the day's laughter and conversations. "You know what I thought today, seeing everyone gathered?" Alexander commented, his arm comfortably surrounding Victoria's shoulders. "That all my life I've been building structures, when what really matters are the spaces they create. The places where life happens, where connections form." Victoria considered his words, recognizing the profound truth they contained. "Like this home," she responded, "it's not just the walls and roofs, but what happens inside, the memories we build day by day." "Exactly," he confirmed. "And of all the projects I've undertaken, this is by far the most important. Our home, our family, this space where we can all be authentically who we are." Under the starry sky, in the garden where a swing swayed gently in the night breeze, in the house they had transformed with their own hands and hearts, Alexander and Victoria silently sealed the promise they had been fulfilling each day, to continue building together, not just physical structures, but the emotional home where everyone, Matthew, Claire, Eleanor themselves, could fully flourish. And as the stars traced their eternal constellations above them, both knew with certainty that they had found, after many detours and trials, the true meaning of success, not in impressive skyscrapers or bank accounts, but in the unbreakable bonds they had forged, in the love they had patiently cultivated, and in the home they had built together, stone by stone, day by day, choice by choice.